So there are a lot of build guides going around right now that will tell you that you are invincible, unstoppable, unkillable, and all the above. But then in the same breath, they will tell you that some attacks are meant to be dodged. And that's a load of crap. Anything in this entire game can be tanked without exception. It's just a matter of preparation. And with that in mind, a lot of you guys had been asking me for an optimized tank build. So that is what we will be covering today. A true tank build schematic for the Apocalypse difficulty. Note that I did say schematic, because there is no one-size-fits-all tank build that will work for everything. A true tank build is fluid and adjusted depending on the needs of the fight. Okie dokie. Getting onto the build though. As usual, we are going to discuss what we are using before we discuss why we are using it. But unlike prior build videos, as I stated in the start of the video, this is not meant to be the only way you use this build. It is meant to be adjusted depending on the boss fight. So while everything I'm about to list is the baseline build that you want to use, just keep in mind that we're going to discuss how you modify this to suit your needs later in the video. So if you're confused on any particular build choices or have questions on possible replacements, just give me a moment and I will explain. For our armor, we are going with the full Lido Mark II set with the exception of the Labyrinth gloves since they give more armor. Also, just as a quick side note, I wish we could shut the hell up about how their armor looks. It's the most effective armor we're gonna get, and if you want to face tank bosses, you just have to look like a dildo, and that's how it is. Shut up. Anyways, we are using Crystal Heart as our relic, with healing effectiveness, health, and damage reduction. Our amulet is Nimue's Ribbon. And then for our rings, we are using Dead King's Memento, Fey Protector's Signet, Seal of the Empress, and Blessed Ring. Weapons do not matter in the slightest. It is entirely up to you on what you bring, but I will recommend that you bring Song of Aether on a gun, as it has some ass-saving utility that we'll discuss later. We are using the Medic archetype as our primary class, and then we are using the Engineer archetype as our secondary class. However, as I stated before, there are multiple things we can change with this build, and the secondary archetype is definitely one of them. For traits, we are using Triage and Fortify, then we spec into Regrowth, finish off Vigor and Spirit, spec into Siphoner, 4 points in Barkskin, 4 points in Glutton, and then if we are using a minion-based secondary archetype, then we spec into Bloodbond and Rugged. Now that we've covered what we are using, now let's cover why we are using it, starting with how we are reaching the damage reduction cap. With the Fortify trait, our end total armor value is at 330. This puts our end armor DR at 62.26%. Then we use Blessed Ring to give us 2 stacks of Bulwark, 4 points into Barkskin, Crystal Heart for 25%, and then the Mythic DR Fragment for 5% on your relic. We then bolster our EHP by speccing into Vigor, using the Mythic Health Fragment on our relic, and then using these 3 rings to bring our total health value to 201.2, bringing our total EHP to almost exactly 1000 without any other damage mitigation sources like Song of Aether or Bloodbond. Now obviously, as I mentioned before, if we are using a minion-based secondary archetype, then we have Bloodbond, which will increase our effective health, and then we have Song of Aether that we mentioned before, to, in a pinch, raise it even further. If you are confused on how this is achieved or what any of this means, I have an entire other video on damage reduction and effective health that will break it down in detail for you. Now that we've covered how we are hitting that damage reduction and bolstering our effective health, let's go over how we are achieving our healing to recover that health where needed. We spec'd into Regrowth because free healing is never a bad thing, and then our relic is the Crystal Heart, which gives us 100% of our max health healed over 10 seconds. Since we are using the Medic archetype, we get 15% increased relic efficacy by default, as well as 50% increased healing effectiveness from the Triage trait. However, we boost both of these, with Nimue's Ribbon adding 50% to our relic efficacy, and the healing effectiveness fragment giving us an additional 20%, bringing our total maximum health healed over 10 seconds to 280%. But why does that healing even matter? It's because we are using Medic as our primary archetype. The prime perk given to us when Medic is in our primary slot is Regenerator, which allows us to, after X amount of healing, refund a relic charge. This means that as long as you have enough tankiness to actually take a hit in the first place, you can almost freely use your relics every 10 seconds without having to worry about them ever running out. Since as you get damaged, you will just heal it and get the relic charge back. And because we are able to use our relic every 10 seconds, this means we get to keep 100% uptime on our Blessed Ring Bulwark stacks, relics, as well as take constant advantage of the haste benefit from Nimue's Ribbon. This doesn't quite counteract the 50% reduced move speed given by Crystal Heart, but it's not like we actually give a shit anyways since we are tanking. We have completely given up on dodging. But while you're going about using these relics every 10 seconds, remember that Medic gains -1 to their stagger level while in a relic use animation. This includes when your arm is reaching back to grab the relic in the first place. Because of that, you'll notice in the fight playing in the background, I don't always use the relic every 10 seconds just because it's not always needed. But in addition to that, I seemingly use the relic in hopeless scenarios when the boss is just about to hit me and you know there's obviously no way I'm going to get that relic off. I'm not using it to get a relic off in that scenario. I'm using it to prevent myself from being knocked to the floor. And while in the end it doesn't really matter too much if I got knocked to the floor, it's just a matter of convenience. However, if you would still like to dodge, there are ways we can modify this that we'll talk about here in a moment. I say almost freely use your relics without having to worry about them running out, because you can in some cases still run out. To alleviate this, you can run a minion or summon based secondary archetype to make it so your relic economy just isn't a concern anymore. This works because minions receive relic healing, and because they receive relic healing, they count towards the amount of healing required in order to refund a relic. I've had instances where I have used one relic and healed myself and my minions so much that I got up to 3 charges back. And because you are taking advantage of a minion-based secondary archetype, you are also able to spec into Blood Bond. In addition to Blood Bond allowing us to go over the 80% damage reduction cap, it makes it so your minions will get damaged more often, which means they can get healed more often, which means it is even easier to get your relic charges back. In terms of overall survivability, I do recommend the Summoner, just because the minions have constant uptime, they are never going to die, so you have 100% uptime on your Blood Bond damage reduction bonus. However, minions kind of do fuck all for damage in the wrong scenarios. And this is where Engineer comes in, because the turret counts as a minion, it still works for Blood Bond, and counts for relic healing. And while you don't necessarily have 100% turret uptime, remember that every time you use a relic, it refills 15% of your heavy weapon ammo, so even if a turret is depleted, you get to use a relic and get heavy ammo back, and if the turret is stowed, you get double that amount back, meaning usually within about 2 relic presses, you have your whole entire ammo back to place down your turret again. So if you are willing to sacrifice a little bit of tankiness in exchange for damage, Engineer is an excellent choice. In most cases, the difference between Engineer's turret uptime and the Summoner's minion uptime is not going to be a difference of life and death. But if you ever find yourself needing just a bit more tankiness, Summoner is the way to go. But using Engineer, I was able to achieve the fight that has been playing in the background, Apocalypse Annihilation with Spiteful, without dodging a single time, because if I were dodging, it wouldn't be tanking. But I want to clarify that while the build given as is extremely effective against Annihilation on Apocalypse, even with damage modifiers, this does not mean that this build will work effectively for every other boss in the game, because as I said at the start of the video, there is no one-size-fits-all build, but rather a true tank build is one that adjusts depending on what is needed. And the reasoning for this is some bosses hit harder, but hit way less frequently than others do, meaning that you need to be able to tank more, but heal less often, while other bosses hit for far less damage, but hit you significantly faster than other bosses do, meaning that you need to tank less, but heal more. A really great example would be Ravager. Ravager hits like a wet noodle, but he hits you so frequently that if you don't have the healing to outpace his damage, you're fucked. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, Venom does so much damage up front that your healing is significantly less important than your ability to take the hit. But where does this build fall in regards to those options? And I'm going to be completely honest, it almost does it all. The build's main priority is to be able to take as high of a damage hit as possible, which is why we capped our DR and why we've bolstered our health as much as we could. The reason we have Nimue's Ribbon on is because we could instead use Navigator's Pendant to bolster our EHP just a little bit more. So technically, if you ever find yourself in a scenario where you need just a little bit more EHP, you could put on Navigator's Pendant and you will likely be able to take whatever hit it is that is somehow killing you. But we already have so much EHP and so much health regen just with Crystal Heart that I haven't really seen anything that actually can kill you or outpace your healing. But if you ever find yourself in a scenario where you need just a little bit more healing, but you can deal with a little less tankiness, you can replace Fey Protector's Signet with Ring of the Forest Spirit. This will boost your relic efficacy by 15%. Now I'm positive that someone is probably going to say, why not use Ring of Grace instead. Surely that is more healing, but it's not. Ring of Grace gives you 10% of your maximum health healed over 10 seconds whenever you take a hit. This does not stack, it only refreshes, meaning that if you do get hit, it's just going to refresh the timer, not add healing values. If we were to use Ring of Grace instead of Fey Protector's Signet, we would lose a little bit of health, which would bring us down to 189.8, but if we factor in that passive health regen of 1% per second, that only puts our effective healing at 0.16 higher than it was before, meaning this is really not a worthwhile change. You're only gaining 0.16 effective health per second at the loss of about 70 EHP total. It is instead more effective to, at the loss of that health, bolster your relic efficacy, bringing it up to 80%, which will heal you 10 effective health per second more than you did before. But beyond this, there aren't actually too many ways to increase your healing that would be more worthwhile than increasing your health. Health is inadvertently a healing increase, because you not only increase your maximum health, but increasing your maximum health increases the amount of healing done by the relic. And because you're increasing the amount of healing done by the relic, that gets to dip into the relic efficacy healing as well as healing effectiveness, whereas Ring of Grace only benefits from healing effectiveness, and other such options are the same. The only ways to achieve worthwhile healing outside of increasing your health just to bolster your general relic efficacy are with shields or lifesteal. On the build, you obviously want to keep Blessed Ring where it is, and you typically want to keep Nimue's Ribbon where it is, but the 3 health rings, as needed, can be swapped out. In order of priority though, you would swap out Fey Protector's Signet first, then Dead King's Memento, and then Seal of the Empress last, just because in that order they give the least to greatest amount of health. But say you are in the middle ground, what then? Because then you're tanking more than you need to, and you're healing more than you need to. At that point, just spec for damage. Like I said before, you will keep Nimue's Ribbon and Blessed Ring on the build, but these 3 rings can be fully specced into damage. You could change the secondary archetype to something like Gunslinger, which will make it so every time you use a relic, it's going to reload your weapon and give you increased damage. Or you could go the Archon route, which will give you free mod power for both weapons every time you use a relic. So no matter which damage route you would prefer to go, you have a means to do so. If you do go the Archon route though, there's obviously a trillion choices you can make in terms of what to replace the rings with, but my personal recommendation is you use the Dense Silicon Ring, which turns 200% of all health regenerated into mod power. Considering that you're always going to be regenerating, this is just a really convenient pick. And then if you want to prioritize dodging instead of having a broken spacebar, you can either replace Nimue's Ribbon with either variant of the Navigator's Pendant, or you can replace the Fey Protector's Signet with Ring of Omens. You can technically use Bright Steel Ring instead, but Ring of Omens will still give you the fast dodge. In addition, it will make it so every time you do dodge, instead of costing stamina, it will cost 15% of your health as gray health. This is particularly useful since you can use that to top off the healing bar and refund a relic charge. Beyond all that though, I'm not sure that there is much else to say. I've given you guys a generalized build schematic for tanking that you only have to tweak a little in order to tank literally anything in the game. I've taught you about DR and EHP and how to bolster your tanking values, along with meaningful healing in relation to that EHP. Going forward, unless new items are added to the game, or unless I missed some crazy interaction, I'm probably done covering tank builds. I can't teach you guys anymore. Making more tank builds beyond this would just be disingenuous. This does not mean that I'm going to stop making Remnant videos altogether, just that I'm no longer going to cover tanking. So if I do have another Remnant video anytime soon, you can expect it to be on something different.